Mr. Speaker, today we finally found out what the Premier's real climate change plan is: to frack, baby, frack. His plan is not to reduce New Brunswick's emissions, but to substantially increase them by creating a fracking industry in our province. Maybe the Premier doesn't remember 2014, when his previous government lost an election on this very issue. New Brunswickers made it clear they don't want fracking, they want climate action. The science clearly says that we cannot create any new fossil fuel infrastructure. To even consider it, when, to quote UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, we are headed for a global catastrophe, is among the most irresponsible things you could do. It's reckless, it's completely unacceptable. How does this Premier consider expanding the fossil fuel sector to be an acceptable solution to the climate crisis?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly glad the member opposite brought up the science, because that's what this is all about, the science. So we will say that we want to reduce our emissions by 1.5% of the world emissions, Mr. Speaker, then we'll call that success. Mr. Speaker, the Paris Accord said that we had to do our part in global emission reduction. And we are doing our part, and we can meet that, Mr. Speaker. But we can do more than our part. What's the U.S. doing? What are other countries doing? What are the energy companies doing in the world? They're developing their natural gas resource, not only to manage affordability and the issues and the crisis that we're feeling every day in this province from higher and higher energy prices, but they're doing it to shut down coal plants, Mr. Speaker, and reduce emissions by 50% for every single coal plant they shut down. We have a transition for the next 15, 20 years, Mr. Speaker, in relation to when hydrogen and nuclear will play the significant role or the dominant role. And we have people that want to sign up right now for 20-year agreements in Europe, Mr. Speaker. So let the science prevail. I am very comfortable with that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Memramcook-Tantramar.
I don't think that this Premier is very in touch with the science on the climate crisis. And frankly, shale gas is a bridge to nowhere, Mr. Speaker. This Premier is stuck in another century. And the Premier said he started out on a mission to save New Brunswick, and now he sounds like he's on some misguided crusade to save the world. What is it that this Premier doesn't get about leaving fossil fuels in the ground? What does this Premier not understand about the International Energy Agency saying we must not build any new fossil fuel infrastructure? What is it that he doesn't get about the fact that fracking creates greenhouse gas emissions? It cannot be responsibly developed, as the Premier claims. Considering the alarming warnings from scientists, the lack of consultation with First Nations, the lack of a social license from New Brunswickers, how can the Fracking Premier of New Brunswick support the creation of a shale gas industry on unceded and unsurrendered Wabanaki territory?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, what we are talking about here is how the science supports a major initiative here that can affect climate action in the country, in the world, and that's the goal, Mr. Speaker. And yes, First Nations need to be a key component of this, and even a small component of what we have available to us. The First Nations benefit could range anywhere between $800 million and $1.6 billion. And yes, they need to be part of this expansion and this growth in this industry. But, Mr. Speaker, it'll be the largest single opportunity that we will have in a generation in New Brunswick in order to have the biggest impact anywhere. The power of New Brunswick hasn't even been recognized, Mr. Speaker, because we sit in a bubble and we don't look at the opportunities worldwide. So I want to go back to what the member of the Green Party stated. Let's look at the science. Let's look at the option. And, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the gaps that exist between the usage and the increased usage of energy, and who's going to fill that. We can fill a gap, Mr. Speaker.